Hey everyone, it's Steve from the garden. In today's video, I'm going to be planting some of my lettuce that's going to be going into mid-fall. But I also want to talk about my hinge hoop house built here to help protect the plants as the weather starts to cool down. You can see I got the bottom frame already in place. This bed is 10 feet by 5 feet, which is roughly 3 meters by 1.5 meters. For construction, I used pressure treated 2x4s. So this is a 2x4 that's 10 feet long, along with another one that runs all the way over to the end. Now the reason I didn't bring this out here was because I wanted to put my hinge on this side, and that way the hinge is on this piece where, you know, it's going to get the most stress going up and down. Now if you look at how I did the construction on this, I put pocket screws here, so I have one in the center. I have one right here. And I have another one here underneath this bracket. So after I put a pocket screw on each of these ends, and then in the center, then I attached this corner bracket to help hold it in place. Same thing was done on this side. This is in one of the other outside corners. On the center, I took a 2x4 and I had cut it in half to make a 2x2. Now this is not pressure treated wood, and this should last pretty long because it's always on the inside of the bed except for when I don't have a cover on it. But I did the same kind of thing here. I put a pocket screw here. Now you might have trouble seeing it because there's a knot right here, but there's another pocket screw there. And then I cut out these pieces, this is just a 45-degree angle. Put them on there, and then use some screws to secure that in. Now obviously when I'm planting, I have to make sure I don't put any plants right there in the center. Like these red sage are here. Well, they were here during summertime and this cover wouldn't be on. But now that I'm putting it on, they're going to get crushed right there. For attaching the hoops, I used 1/2-inch PVC pipes, and I just put the end caps in and I basically screw them right into the frame here. And this gives me just enough width where once I put the inside hoop in, I can run like a furring strip right down the center to hold the plastic in place. You can see that better here where I have the end caps, and then this strip is just wide enough for a furring strip. When you're putting in these end caps, you want to make sure you use a good quality decking screw. Like in this case, I'm using 1 5/8. That's because the 2x4 is 1.5 inches thick. So, and there's a thickness obviously to the end cap itself. So 1 5/8 will put it so it goes all the way down without poking through and going into the bottom. What I found was if I use something like a drywall screw, that they will tend to snap when I go to remove the pipes in the springtime. If you notice, I have this space so it's inside this board. That's because I'm going to have a furring strip that goes right here. So I want to make sure the hoop is on the inside of the board. To make life easier in the spring when you go to take this apart, you want to put like a little bit of some lightweight oil in here. In my case, I'm just going to use a little bit of WD-40 in there. And that way, the oil, when I put the PVC pipe in, it'll allow it to slip in and out much easier than if it's just dry fitted. The dry fitting is what tends to cause the screws to snap because you're putting a lot of pressure on there to pull it out. When it comes to putting the pipes in, all you have to do is push it on there, push it in, and it sits real nicely. You know, with the oils, it goes in really quick. For the pipes themselves, I'm using 1/2-inch PVC pipe. This is sold in a 10-foot length. And the plastic I'm using is also sold in a 10-foot width. And on the inner hoop, because it's a little bit shorter than the outer hoops, you have to make sure you trim this down. So I'm trimming the inner hoops for the actual hoop part to 8 feet 6 inches. Now obviously that leaves, some scrap on the ends, but it makes a bigger deal on the outside hoops, because the outside hoops, you have to have a little bit of overhang, and I'll show you that in just a second. But the outer hoops I cut at 9 feet 6 inches. That gives me 3 inches outside the length of the hoop on each side, so I can drape the plastic down. Now you can see I got pipes running the length of the bed, and I got 3 sets of them. And that's so that it adds a little more structural support to it. And in my area, it gets cold, we get snow, and having the extra pipes on here not only makes it stiffer, but it helps hold up against any snow that piles up on this. Most of the time the snow actually just kind of falls off, but just in case you get a heavy snow, it holds up. Now the length of the pipe is 7 inches shorter than the length of the bed, because I need it on the inside. Plus you're subtracting the length of the T here too. So my bed is 10 feet long minus the 7 inches plus minus another ½ inch on each side. So that gives me 112 inches on this bed. For the T's I'm using a 3/4 inch PVC T that reduces down to a ½ inch. So that easily slides over the ½ inch tube and then holds the ½ inch pipe running the length of the bed in place. To secure each T in the proper position so it doesn't move around, I drilled a hole through the end and then just secured it with a screw. To hold the pipes together, in my case I just used some electrical tape, kind of did like a figure 8 type of thing around it to hold everything in place. It doesn't need to be super strong, but you just want something that can hold up to the weather, hold up to some moisture. So the electrical tape worked fine. You could use duct tape or something like that too, I'm sure. What you'd probably not want to do is use something like, say, like a masking tape, because that would just deteriorate in the moisture. Once you pull your plastic on, the plastic usually has like a crease right in the middle, so you can kind of line that up with the top purlin. And then, like, this sheet's going to be 10 feet wide, so there's going to be some excess over here on the side. Now this is actually the sheet that was on the top last year, so I'm moving it from the top into the inside, and I'll put a new top sheet on this year. To hold the plastic in place, I'm just using a furring strip. Now this strip I've used for several years and it's still good, so I'm going to go ahead and use it again this year. Now it's important that when you go to screw these down that you pre-drill the holes, because this furring strip, this wood will crack pretty easy. So if you don't pre-drill it, you just put the screw right through it, it'll probably crack on you. Now since this is the first side I'm doing, it's not quite as critical, but you want this plastic to be as tight as possible. So on the first side you're going to secure it down, and then on the other side you'll end up having to pull that plastic tight and then secure the plastic in place. Now for me, I got the strip so that the long side is going to exceed the length of the inside, and then I just cut the short side boards that fit in between the two long boards. This gives you a little bit better view where you can see the inside cap and the outside cap. And all I'm going to do is go ahead and screw that in place. Now if you notice, this strip fits perfectly right between the two caps. And that's because when I built this, I put the inside cap on first, put the strip down, and then I secured the outside cap afterward. Here's an example of what can happen if you don't pre-drill the holes. Is they put the screw in, the board split, and now that part won't hold quite as well. Now since these strips are 8 feet long and my bed's 10 feet, I had to use a second strip and just cut it to a shorter length. And I just butt that up, screw it in place. Now that I'm on the second side, with the first side secured down, now I just want to try to get this plastic, reasonably tight as I can. I don't need to be like super critical on this, You know, it is, you know, just a backyard garden, so it's not like I'm in need of perfection over here. But as I screw that first one down, and I can kind of pull everything tight. Put that second one in place. Now it'll hold it pretty well. It's important to note that the plastic sheeting I'm using on here is just 6mm plastic sheeting. It's not greenhouse plastic. This stuff is much less expensive than greenhouse plastic, and since it kind of gets tore up a little bit each year, you know, I don't want to spend money on the greenhouse plastic. If you were going to use greenhouse plastic, which would be ideal, you'd want to make sure that you'd cover the PVC pipes with, they sell like a tape that you can put on that covers the pipe so that the PVC pipe doesn't react with the plastic. Greenhouse plastic should last, you know, 4 or 5 years. If it's directly touching the PVC pipe, it'll deteriorate where that contact is made. The plastic sheeting, I don't keep it quite that long, so I don't really worry about that interaction. But it's something that if I did keep it on here long enough, it would be a factor. The trickiest part of putting this plastic on and doing these hoop houses is the end caps. Because the plastic is square and the hoops are round, it's not going to fit perfectly. So all you can do is just the best you can. What I like to do is I try to get it reasonably tight here in the center, and I'll screw that down. And then I can kind of go through and let it fold a little bit on each end as I try to pull it tight, and I'll screw that down after that. And all this excess that's on here, I'll just trim off with a utility knife. With the plastic in place, I can just take a utility knife now and trim off the extra plastic. I have the excess plastic trimmed off. I attached the outer layer hoops. Now this is what's important and why you have to shorten the inside from the outside, is that you want this air gap in here. So if you made them both the same length, the inside would be too tall and you wouldn't be able to get the outside one on. And it's this air gap that gives you like that extra protection in the wintertime, because you know the sun traps the heat between the two layers, so that you build up some extra heat here, and that heat gets radiated into the inside and gets held inside. Right now it's 64 degrees outside Fahrenheit, and when I opened this thing, even though it wasn't on there that long, it was probably like 80 degrees inside here. So it's important to pop this thing open on a sunny day where it's not that cold outside, so you don't bake everything underneath it. Now what I do is I have a couple different boards I use. I have a longer one that pops it open all the way. I have a shorter 2x4 where if I need to open up a little ways. And I have a couple of bricks I can use if I need to pop it open a little bit. Sunny days where it's in the 50s and 60s, you want to open this thing up. And if necessary, you can close it at night. During the winter time, when it really starts getting cold, you can probably just leave it closed all the time, or if necessary, you just pop it open a little bit in the morning to get some airflow and to let some of that excess heat out. It's the next day. I'm ready to put the second layer of plastic on. Now there's one real important difference between the first layer of plastic and the second layer of plastic. For the first layer, we were able to put this furring strip here on the top, but for the second layer, there's not enough room on the top to do that. So we have to attach the furring strip to the side of the frame to secure the plastic. And that's why we need that overhang, and that's also why we needed to cut the outer hoops shorter than the 10 foot so that we would have enough, you know, overlay to be able to do this furring strip. When I put the plastic on for the outer hoops, I always do the part that opens first, and then I save the hinge side for second. since this is the outer layer, you want this to be pretty tight if you can get it that way. But another aspect you have to keep in mind is that you have the hinge here, so you want to make sure that you line up your furring strip so it goes right into one of the holes for the hinge, and that way you have a secure connection on the end, and you also, have the hinge secured too. Another thing with doing this outer layer is I find it helpful to do both like the end, the center, and then the far end, and then save the middle parts for last so that the board's in place and I can kind of pull it tight and then put the screw in place. This is where it's helpful if you have a second person to give you a hand with this. That makes it much easier. In addition to keeping the hoop house open when you need it, you have to make sure that when it is open, that the wind doesn't catch it and open it too far and potentially break your hoops. So what I do is I just have like 3 screws here where I can loop a piece of rope around them to keep that secure. And then on the bottom I have another pair of screws where I just tie it off on. Now if you had like one of those little loops, you could screw that in there and then tie it up to that too. The wind is an important consideration with these hoop houses because they are like a big sail if the wind catches them right. So one of the things I did is my wind direction generally comes from the west in some way, whether it's due west, northwest, southwest. So the opening here actually faces east, where I'm the least likely to get wind blowing into it and opening it up too far. I hope this inspires you to build your own hinged hoop house, because adding season extension makes a great addition to the garden. For myself, I live in the Chicago area. It gets down to minus 15, even minus 25 sometimes. And having this double hinged hoop house allows me to grow lettuces and other cold season stuff into the early winter. I've even had lettuce overwinter completely because of this hoop house. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. Hope you got something out of this, and we'll see you on the next one.